Good morning. I'm Craig Harvey. For anybody who didn't already know that, I haven't done one of these talks in a long time, so bear with me, but I'm not going to try to give any excuses for anything. So the talk today is about, is there hope for humanity? Now, I don't want this to be as humorous as some of the things that I do when I have a microphone in front of me, but there'll probably be some humor. And the first thing, I found it very humorous leading up to today. Even this morning walking in, yesterday, Dave Bell asked me, Craig, what's the answer? I mean, I was in here meditating, called me out, he wanted to talk to me. I said, okay, what's the answer to what? Oh, is there hope? Well, I didn't want to give away the answer. I mean, he might not come today if he knew the answer. But I was curious why he wanted to know. And he said, oh, so he knew what kind of meditation to do today. Now, I ask you, if I had told him the answer was no, there's no hope, what kind of meditation would he have done? I was trying to envision that. And then Laz this morning asked me, so what's the answer? I want to make sure my songs are in line with what I'm going to say. So, anyway, I don't know the answer. However, I had to tell them the answer was positive so that they would have something to go on. Well, I have help today. All I am doing, or at least I'm doing my best at, is channeling my cat, Baby. Baby, one of my many nicknames for him is the Prince of Peace, or my Buddha buddy. That's the kind of cat he is. So I'm sure he knows the answer. But when I first put out the email that I was doing this talk and the title of it, one person responded and said, yes, or my answer is yes. And I said, okay. And that's one way to look at this question. Is there hope for humanity? Hope is something that, it's just hope. I mean, I don't mean to belittle it, but it is something that exists in your heart, in your mind. It's not something out there. If one person has this much hope, then there's hope, right? There it is, that little bit of thing. And there's probably more than that out there, in this room especially. So that's one way to answer this. Okay, somebody has a little bit of hope. There is hope for humanity. However, being an engineer by background, I have to dissect this much more detail than that. Analyze it to death, balance the pros and the cons, and see what the equation, what it solves out to be. So first let's dissect the question. I already mentioned hope. And obviously another way to look at hope is there reason, is there a basis to have hope? Which is probably the way a lot of people tend to interpret that question. Do we have any reason to actually have hope for humanity? And then, okay, for how long? I mean, right now we have humanity, we have the human race. Oh, okay, so many thoughts. Help me, baby, calm down. Okay. Baby's not nervous. So, for how long? Okay, roughly 1 billion to 4 or 5 billion years from now, the sun, which is the source of all energy that provides living energy, life for plants, animals, us on this planet, is going to get hotter and hotter, and roughly 1 billion or so years from now, it'll be hot enough that supposedly all the oceans will dry up and we'll be fried to dust. So, as our bodies, that is. Okay. So, after that point, I would say the only reason for any hope for the human race is to be off this planet, which I think is very possible technologically, the rate things are going. Or the other option is to divert the orbit of the planet to be a little further out from the sun as needed. And the ability to do that kind of thing also could help us avoid errant asteroids or rogue planets or stars or something coming through our solar system and obliterating the planet. So I mean, I think technologically there's hope for these things. But that's talking about humanity as the human race, this species. Chances of, well, evolutionarily, things change. And so I personally think there's a reasonable chance the human race will have evolved to something hopefully better, more resilient, smarter, more loving, etc., than we have already by 1 billion years from now. I mean, human race has existed on this planet for just, 400,000 years or so, or 100,000, depending on which version of humans you want to look at. So 1 billion years, it's a long time. Plenty of room for change and growth. So that's one definition of humanity. The other definition, which I also think is at least as important, is humanity, kindness, compassion, caring about one another, which is probably one of the things that brings us together here on Sundays. It's also the force that causes a lot of other good stuff on this planet. It's pretty powerful. It's probably why the human race has managed to exist as long as it has. Our humanity. So I just want to, if you feel like it, before I get into more of the pros and cons and all that, just curious, a show of hands. Do you think there's hope for humanity? All right. That proves that there is hope for humanity, by the way, according to my first definitions.
Are you done now?
I was tempted to leave it at that. But then we just go into open mic, and then I just hear all the pros and the cons from all of you. I'm sure some of you, I'm not going to make you raise your hand, but I bet there's some of you who feel like, well, you know, you read the news, you listen to the news, there can't really be hope for humanity, the way things go. Thank you, Rod, for confirming my suspicions. And we'll see how you feel at the end of the talk. And there's always open mic, so I don't want to change your mind if you don't want to change it. And actually, I'm not trying to change anybody's mind because, like I said, there's a time frame thing, and humanity, the kindness, compassion. I bet without a whole lot of effort, you can recall some incident, even if it's just one, where you noticed somebody expressing something that wasn't humanity, either toward you or toward somebody else. You might even be aware enough to have seen it coming from yourself toward somebody else. Maybe there's somebody in here who has never done that, but I have. So if even I can express inhumanity, there's no hope, right? However, okay, where am I? So if one wanted to do this, not just on the basis of what's in one's heart or the fact that we're capable of hope, we get into analyzing the pros and the cons. And what would we use for that? We could look at history, because that's the data that we have so far. Like I said, we've been around for a few 100,000 years roughly, and I once read this book, very thick book the title of it was Peace. And this guy, I think it's a grad student sort of project, he just scoured historical records trying to find what peace was. Have we ever experienced it on this planet? And the bottom line to his analysis, basically, the only time there's ever real peace is after violent war. And then somebody destroys the enemy enough that they can impose peace or maintain it. That's not the kind of peace that I like to think about. Oh, that's the other thing I want to get into, with defining hope for humanity. I'm not just talking about existence. I mean, we could have major apocalypse, nuclear winter, blah, blah, blah. Chances are some of us would survive. But if there's a few people just hanging out in isolation and fear and famine and just barely surviving, I don't think that's what I'm talking about for hope for the future, hope for humanity. So, make that clear. Humans have a history of being, if not individual, being tribal, and having fears of the other tribes, of the other, which leads to conflict over resources. So that's historically, in terms of us becoming more humane toward one another, history doesn't look really good to me in that sense. Now, there's other factors. The world is getting smaller. Technology, communication. It's really easy to find out what the other is all about if one is open to checking it out and gaining understanding of one another, which creates more humaneness, more humanity in that sense. Then again, technology also gives us the ability nowadays to corrupt that communication very easily, as we've seen in the news. So if you have one person trying to understand this other person, trying to build kindness and love for this other person, and that communication channel is intercepted by somebody else who is trying to make the world a less happy, friendly, loving place, it makes it really hard to build understanding. Pros and cons. What else we have? I talked about the threats in terms of not astrological. There may be some of those too, I don't know. Astronomical, things impinging on us, the sun going nova or whatever. Supervolcanoes, you might have heard about that. There have been times in our history, this planet's history, when huge, bigger than anything you can imagine. They've talked about the huge supervolcano at Yellowstone. If that goes up, this planet has experienced much worse than that would be, and it causes mass extinctions. Not all species, but lots. Something like humans would probably go extinct under some of those scenarios. Anyway, that's threats. Then we got geological, but I think the biggest threats to humanity in terms of survival and kindness is just ourselves. What the inhumanity, man's inhumanity to man. We've all seen examples of that, and it's been crazy throughout history. As I mentioned, we're creating new technologies, biological, artificial intelligence that could go crazy, nanotechnology that could go crazy, and that's even without people intending it to have harmful effects. If you throw in, we have to weaponize everything, then it makes it even more likely that we'll manage to wipe ourselves out somehow. Climate change, et cetera, et cetera. So, what is that? I mentioned that this other thing. I should probably keep a little eye on the time. Okay. Anyway, you've probably heard of like the reptilian brain, the amygdala, this part of our brain that we go into, I have been known to go into, when we're stressed or afraid or traumatized somehow. And I think that's one of the big reasons that we get into conflicts and we show unkindness to one another. We hold on to fixed ideas. We get the idea that something is a survival idea, like I'm better than them or whatever. The whole racism thing, we get the idea that this is a survival concept and we hang on to it for all it's worth. So what can you do about that? There's waiting for evolution to fix that. Evolutionarily, you probably heard of the survival of the fittest. If you actually look at Darwin's research, and Peter Kropotkin, a Russian researcher from decades ago, basically he and Darwin's book also overwhelmingly says the same thing. It's not survival of the fittest. It's survival of the most cooperative. The better a species is able to cooperate with itself and with other species, the more likely they will survive. So if we give evolution enough time, maybe this whole reptilian brain part of us will subside and be taken over by the kindness, compassionate part of the brain. In the more near term, it's cool. The recognition of trauma as an important factor in how we treat each other it's growing by leaps and bounds right now. Recognition of it, dealing with it, and actually resolving it. There are techniques out there today that are amazingly effective at helping people let go of their past traumas, and thus making them more open to having that kind connection with their fellow human beings. I think I'm going to wind it down there. But the secret weapon for humanity, having humanity for one another, is, I see the fact that we are spirit. We are one. Underneath it all, or above it all, or however you want to put it, we are one. We are spirit. Whatever happens to us as human bodies, whether our reptilian brains exist or not, or go away eventually, or we manage to deal with it, underneath it all, we're spirit. We have connection with each other. It's there. And we have abilities to push it away and hold it off, but it's like Mother Nature, kind of. You concrete over the whole thing, you build walls as thick as you want. Eventually, Mother Nature will grow life through that. And we, as spirit, seem to be able to do the same thing with our connections. Thank you.